How about that? Okay. All right. So, first of all, I want to preface this with the fact that I have never given this presentation before. I kind of wrote this talk and put it out there to the universe, and nobody's wanted to hear anything but AI for a long time now. Like, I haven't presented anything other than AI for months. So it's kind of weird when this was the one that was selected. I was like, okay, now I actually have to make a slide deck for this thing. So this will be the first time. My timing may be off. I don't know. We'll see how it works. But what I wanted to do with this is something that I've done in the past on some of my talks, which is kind of a lessons learned when it comes to cybersecurity and things like that. So it's something that I've been in the field for a while. Here, I'll put my vanity slide up. So I've been in IT and security since back in the 1990s, forever ago, like back in the 1900s, right? I've been doing it for different industries. I've been in manufacturing. I've done it for healthcare. I spent about 10 years with the U.S. Army, where I ended up going through different teams in that 10 years, from domain administrator, like I helped roll out the Army's Active Directory. I was a domain admin in some of the domains for the Army's Active Directory and the rollout there. And then I worked my way through. I was an audit team lead. I did physical security lead for our organization for a while. I've been through all of these kinds of different areas, and eventually I ended up the security manager for this organization it's called the 2nd Regional Cyber Center. We did the Army's network infrastructure across all of North America. So we saw some pretty interesting things there. I always wanted to write a book about that, but I figured I'd just have to call it redacted. It would be a bunch of black pages with a couple of words in it. But saw some pretty interesting stuff throughout my career. And I've got a lot of experience doing different things throughout these different jobs. And one thing you'll notice about InfoSec as you're getting into it is there's lots of different niches that you can be a part of, right? In the beginning, way back when, us IT folks were kind of the InfoSec people or the security people, but that just meant a firewall. That meant a couple of other things like that. And then it kind of split off into its own branches and those sorts of things. So, like back in the beginning, when you were an IT person, you were responsible for anything that plugged into the wall. Okay, whether it was a copier, a computer, or a coffee maker. It didn't matter if it was electrical. They're like, hey, that's you. It's gotten a lot more focused, which is kind of cool because it gives us a lot more opportunities. Now, of these things we've done, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff here that I've found that's helped me a lot in my career when it comes to building an organization's security. And we're going to see how this goes, right? I have no idea how this is going to go. So this should be fun and exciting. Now, again, any of you guys see ISSPs? Anyone? Okay. All right. Yeah. So I was the director of member relations and services at ISC² for a couple of years. Yeah, my name was on one of the ones that went out that said your AMFs are going up. So be nice to me. It wasn't my fault. The board made me do it. But I worked in that kind of industry as well. Now, this is what I get to do. I get to go around, I get to speak about stuff. I do media ops. It's kind of cool. Like, I never thought as a security person that I would see my fat butt on CNN. But it's kind of cool seeing that back at you, or being a resource for a local news station even that gets syndicated out. That's kind of cool. My dad called me up. He's like, I saw you on the news in Arizona, and I live in Florida, right? There's some cool stuff we can do with this. But again, this is about kind of experience. So I did write a little book, 50 Ways to Survive and Thrive in Cybersecurity. Co-wrote that with a guy named Javad Malik. He's my British compatriot over there. And we do a podcast as well, pretty much all the Fridays. You might notice up here, we had a local celebrity join us yesterday live from the CTF. She had no idea we were live here. About the time I tell her, oh, by the way, we're live. Yeah, that would be the moment right there. She went on camera and about died. But we get to do fun stuff like this, okay? This is some of the stuff that... keep this in mind, too. When you're doing this job, you can have some fun stuff like this. We've been doing this podcast for, well, it started off at RSA. We came back to the hotel room every night. We did what we called the daily recap. and we had so much fun doing it. We're now 158 episodes into this thing. So anyways, enough about that. I just wanted to embarrass Jimmy. Because, yeah. So, all right, we're going to talk about some things here: threats, risk, mitigations, incident response, which I think is something that, to me, it was fascinating, it was fun, and it actually helped stretch my comfort level in a lot of ways in the roles that I was in. So this is really designed to give us some things to think about, especially when we're in there, and some of the things that I learned, like I said, some defense. And what about AI? Because I had to throw in some AI because I'm jonesing for something AI. If we have lots of time left at the end, I've got some novel things I started doing actually last week with AI that I think can give us an idea also of other things we can do within our organizations. So starting off with the threats, there's a significant number of threats within organizations that sometimes we don't really think about all the different ways that we have threats coming in from the different directions, okay? A lot of what we do is inside threats. So I worked for KnowBe4. We do security awareness training, simulated phishing, we do some email type stuff. But we really focus on the human element. And the human element is one of the biggest ones that gets exploited in organizations. But what I found is most of us that are in this field, we love technology, not people. Like, I have never seen anyone say, I'm not taking that job, and they come back and they go, what if we let you train users? And they're like, yeah, I'll take that job now. That just doesn't happen, right? That's not where we're wired. That's not how we are. So a lot of times we're not comfortable tackling that problem. But what I learned in my career is that that's a big one. But I also want to be clear about this. We need to be careful how we couch this and talk about this to other people. I've said it, I've seen people say it, users is a 4-letter word, and if we let that go to our mind and we start being adversarial towards our users and not understanding why it's a problem, we're going to cause ourselves more problems. But understand, a lot of our threats, a lot of the stuff we see, and a vast majority of stuff that we see on the news started off with a social engineering attack. It's phishing, it's all of the different types of things that we're seeing now these days. Okay, now the DBIR said about 74% of breaches involve the human element, which includes social engineering attacks, errors, and misuse. Okay, I personally think the number is higher than that in most of what I see. This is what Verizon saw. And the way they categorize it's always a little bit weird. What I do like about this is we oftentimes don't think about errors or misuse as something that we have any sort of a role in, but ultimately, if we think about it, that is a threat, and it's something that we should consider. How could somebody have a problem here? Should we have policies that require 2 people to check off something to make sure that we didn't leave credentials in place or something along those lines? Like, should there be 2-person integrity in places? We don't often think about that from a security standpoint as far as fixing this sort of problem, but I think it's a very important one that gets overlooked. Now, the outside threats, we see this all the time, right? And script kiddies to nation states, it's amazing what people with no skills whatsoever are able to pull off these days. There are as-a-service things out there that are absolutely fantastic. Phishing as a service is, ransomware as a service, malware as a service. These things give incredible dashboards that give how many people opened things at what time. It's amazing the tools that are being written out there. And what it does, though, is it allows people with actually no technical skills or very little technical skills to be able to pull off a lot of these attacks. So we're seeing attacks go up and the quality of attacks improving, and we're having to defend against that, okay? They're definitely moving quickly. We're definitely seeing external forces. How many of you have worked in an organization that's had to deal with like a successful ransomware attack or something like that? Yeah, it's not fun, but it's happening a lot. So we got to think about the external part. The internal part, I would say, oftentimes is a bigger threat than the external in a lot of ways. And again, I'm going to step back a little bit, but how many of you have ever in your organization had like a salesperson leave and try to take your whole customer database with them? Okay, Yeah, we don't think about that all the time, but they'll try to grab the whole customer database and take it over to the next company. And now all of a sudden they've leveled up those folks there, and they'll start contacting, hey, this bill that I was over here, that's a threat, right? It's just as much of a threat as if a bad actor gets in and steals your information and starts selling it somewhere else too. So yeah, ransomware, man, it's gone crazy. So from 2018 to 2019, average ransom demand jumped from 6,000 to 84,000. Attacks were up by a lot, okay? How many of you remember WannaCry, right? Yeah. I remember when that hit the papers, it was like a big deal, took out the NHS. I like to call that the good old days. WannaCry never demanded a ransom for a single machine over $600. Their typical was $300. I know a lot of people that couldn't get the checkbook out fast enough to be paying $300 a box to get it back online these days, okay? It's exploded. And something happened in 2019 that made a big difference, and that was the Maze ransomware group started exfiltrating data. So there were threats of that. A couple of years before, I think in 2016, I saw it. The San Francisco, the MARTA, or not MARTA, but the San Francisco rapid transit type stuff got hit with a ransomware attack. They said, we're not going to pay the ransom. The bad actors realized it, and they said, well, we stole a copy of your data. We're going to dump it if you don't pay us. And they called their bluff. They said, no, you didn't. And sure enough, they didn't. But a couple of years later, man, the Maze group hit it and started actually doing that. And that's caused some ridiculous things to happen with ransoms, okay? Being able to use the stolen data as leverage against organizations has really driven this up. In Florida, where I'm from, there was a plastic surgery clinic that got hit with ransomware. And when the attackers figured out that they weren't going to pay the ransom, they started reaching out to the patients of that clinic and saying, if we don't get paid, your before and after plastic surgery pictures are going on the internet, right? Can you imagine what kind of leverage that gets them in these negotiations? So ransomware is a big one. Yeah, we were up to about $1.5 million for the average payment last year. I think this year is going to be even higher. I mean, it's gone crazy. It's costly because if you don't have somebody come in and fix stuff like digital forensics and get them out, they just re-enable. There was a group in the UK. It was they paid a £2.4 million ransom, got their systems back up and running. They were about 30 days after the initial attack. Things were kind of steady. They didn't get the bad actors out. They just hit go again and got another £2.5 million out of them. All right? Not a pretty thing to do. This is the stuff we get to fight, guys. So for you students, welcome to the team. Social engineering threats. Again, this is kind of on the human side, but phishing attacks are definitely out there. Business email compromise, which is simply a matter of, hey, I need you to wire a bunch of money, or how about you go buy a bunch of gift cards? And we all go, that's stupid. How could that work? Well, the FBI says there's been about $43 billion in losses in about a 6 or 7 year time on that. That's a lot of money. So it's happening quite a bit on that. This is a big threat for those of you that are pen testers or red teamers. You know the social engineering piece is a very powerful one, getting into systems and stuff. I think it's very interesting because we're spreading out into these new things, right? Vishing. So we're super clever in our technical prowess. So phishing obviously is the email stuff, and then we have the voice phishing, which is vishing, because hey, who saw that coming? And then the text message, which is SMS phishing or smishing. Okay, see what we did there? And then we have my least favorite word I think I've ever heard, which is quishing. Have you all heard quishing? This is QR code phishing, all right? Collectively, we need like a PR department to make this stuff a little bit better, all right? Because this is pretty lame. You go into the boss and you go, we were hit with a quishing attack. Who's going to take you seriously when you throw that one down, okay? All right, you just can't say that like it's a big threat. But what's interesting is we're seeing hybrid types of attacks with these. So we've been seeing this for a little bit. I'm seeing more and more of it, though, where somebody will receive an email, for example, and it's followed up by a text message from that person that says, hey, I just sent you a super urgent email. I need you to go out and take care of this right now. And so people go, oh, well, I've got a second level of confirmation on this. Clearly, it's legitimate. When it's not. And how many, we've talked about it a couple of times. I've heard it talked a couple of times about here. The big Zoom call where they transferred out. It was around 25 or $30 million US got thrown out there. That was done with deep fakes, but it was completely scripted. It wasn't real time. It was completely scripted. So they had these people having a conversation that this other person was invited to. They weren't actually conversing with these people that were doing the scripted deepfake. And then they cut the call off early. They followed up with an email to the finance guy and said, you were on the call, you heard us talking about it, we need you to wire out that 25 million. And he went, oh, well, I was on the call, I heard them talk about it, that's confirmation enough, and fired off 25 million. But that was all deep fakes on that Zoom call. This stuff's getting pretty real. We've got to be looking at it from that angle. So how many of you have seen where people are putting like QR codes over parking meters? Have you guys seen that, right? So you go to pay your parking and you're actually sending money somewhere else. You get a parking ticket, yay for you. Just tricky stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I was so tempted. I live in this gated neighborhood in Florida, and we got a new gate system up there in this neighborhood. And the temptation was so real. They put up a big sign right by the gate saying, here's the information on the new gate system, scan this QR code. And it was a giant QR code, and I'm like, oh my God, I could rickroll about 900 households very quickly if I just printed my own QR code and stuck it up there. Now, there's this adage that you, I guess, don't crap in your own bed. So I figured if I pulled that off, the HOA would be out there measuring my grass every week with a ruler, like, yeah, this is that FAFO thing you hear about, right? But if you think about it, this stuff is really common out there, and we got to deal with these threats. Another interesting one that I've seen coming in is there were some letters sent out to some folks in Southern California. Letters in the mailbox. Remember that old thing that's in the front of your house that every once in a while you go get the junk out of and throw it away? Well, it came in and it was like, it was a parking ticket. It said you were parked on the street overnight when they were doing street sweeping, and you have a $53 parking ticket. And it gave a QR code to scan to go pay your ticket. I thought that was super clever, because there's a couple things at work here. First of all, they say it happened in the middle of the night. Okay, well, if you did have a car parked out there, you wouldn't have woken up and noticed the street sweeper come in. So you kind of take that as what it is. It came in the mailbox, which is different, it's novel. $53, an amount like that. How long are you gonna go fight and try to dig around for 53 bucks, right? Not a long time, so a lot of people are like, I just want this done. And then with a parking ticket, unlike when you make a purchase for like a goods or services, if I buy something off Amazon, I expect something to come in the mail. If I pay a parking ticket, when I see my credit card statement next time, I'm probably gonna look at it and go, oh, that's a stupid ticket. But I'm not gonna be thinking this was a scam. I need to go back to my credit card company and dispute this. There's a lot of cool little psychology that goes into this. But we're seeing this. There's no reason this can't start happening within organizations as well. Years ago, there was a 48-year-old Lithuanian guy who spun up some offshore companies that had very similar names to vendors for Facebook and Google. They wrote him checks for $100 million because he just sent them invoices. Said, oh, pay me, $100 million. And I'm like, sometimes it's really tempting to be on the other side of this thing, right? Like that, I could buy myself a nice little island in the Caribbean and be done with it all. But something as simple as just sending invoices like that, it's pretty wild that this is going on. But I'm telling you, social engineering is a big one. Something else we sometimes don't think about that I think we need to put a little bit more emphasis on, and maybe this is because I'm from Florida and we just got whacked with 2 hurricanes within a number of 13 days, right? But what about natural disasters? In our programs, we have to consider that. Everywhere's got something that goes wrong, okay? You got earthquakes, tornadoes, We've got the hurricanes, there's flooding. I mean, how many times have we seen this stuff go horribly wrong? And we don't always look at that. What are your data centers hardened against? Are they able to handle this? Now, we look at what happened in North Carolina, and I understand parts of here. Who the hell thought a hurricane was going to take out areas around Asheville? I mean, seriously. But it may not be a huge threat, but it's something to consider when it comes to that. The other thing that I find that gets people sometimes is not just your data center, but who are their providers and how long can they run offline? How long can they provide services? Who remembers Katrina, right? There was like a data center running in the middle of New Orleans when these people are floating by with like waist-high stuff full of beer or whatever they were taking at the time. But there was like one data center that we were able to get to for like information and stuff like that out of there. Everything else, a lot of it because the time that was going on ended up taking those down. They may have run for a little while, a couple hours or a day, but ultimately, you know, what we're seeing in Florida right now, there are places around us that here we are this far away from Milton, and they're still starting to flood because the rivers are rising so much from the water running from the middle of the state out to the Gulf. So there's places that are newly flooding as much as last week based on this. So we got to consider these things. This is a big deal that I've seen go horribly wrong in a number of times. It's a big consideration for us. And another one that's getting newer, been around for a while, but it's getting more teeth, is regulatory issues. We need to be aware of that, and we need to stay on top of that. There was just like a $300 million fine levied against Facebook. We talked about on the podcast yesterday, or Meta, out of, I think it was Ireland. I don't know, that was yesterday we talked about it. But we're seeing that SEC just came down on a bunch of organizations that underreported damages due to various things. That's a big deal. If you want funding and you're in a heavily regulated industry, this is one of the great ways to do it, is tie it to regulatory improvements. But here's the scary thing to me is we've seen regulatory stuff coming back to even criminal charges. And that's something you have to be very aware of, right? Who remembers the Uber incident, right? Yeah, we didn't pay any ransoms. No, that was a red teaming thing. Well, no, that all comes out. Don't try to hide that kind of stuff because it will end up coming out. It will end up being a problem. So this is becoming more of a threat, I think, when it comes to the things that we do in this industry. And we don't always think about us as security people. We don't drive the regulations. We don't even necessarily drive whether we're going to follow some of these regulations. That may come from up top, but we need to be aware of our place in it and our exposure to that sort of thing. Now, risk and mitigations. I threw this in there because I think this is one of those places where it can be a little confusing for us. There's a couple ways we can deal with risk. We can mitigate it, we can accept it, we can avoid it, or we can transfer it. All right? Risk is one of these funny topics that I think we as technologists use the word differently than leadership uses the word. So I've learned the hard way sometimes by going into boards or upper executive type leadership with my thought of this is risk, this is our risk, and I'm using the word risk, and I'm talking about a technical risk when I'm talking to people that are talking about a business risk. And the CEO or the COO's risk may be more along, are we going to make payroll this week, as opposed to we have some vulnerabilities in Unix systems. But we don't always cross that threshold. So it's important that we understand the different types of risk within an organization and learn how to speak to it. How many of you consider yourselves good at speaking to executive leadership? Yeah, there's a couple, right. And most of that, it's been forced on us, and we've learned through miscommunicating a number of times. It hurts. So I highly recommend we work on that a little bit. But let's go through a couple of these things so we understand the risk side of stuff. So risk mitigation, involves taking action to reduce the likelihood or impact of a risk, okay? So patching, segmenting networks, vulnerability assessments, of course, vendor management, and then, of course, I'm going to use CrowdStrike here as an example in these. You know, when we talk about mitigation, that's uninstalling CrowdStrike's Falcon, okay? How many of you is that still fresh for some of you guys, right? Yeah. Yeah, that was a mess, right? But mitigation is looking at different ways to handle this. And where I find this is kind of interesting is, like, I've worked in the medical field. Anyone in here in medical? Okay, we got some. So what I found in my medical stuff is sometimes we had wonderful machines that were old. All the doctors loved the imaging that came out of these machines. It's like $10 million to replace this machine, and the software only runs on XP. And there is no way in hell I'm going to be able to go, I need $10 million to replace this machine that's working extremely well because the OS is vulnerable. Nobody's going to buy that. So you have to find mitigations to that. You have to look at that and you have to go, okay, what can I do? Can I shut down services that I don't need? Can I take some certain things there? Can I isolate it? And then let's say RDP into a machine that is more secure and then use that to then tunnel into that one to deal with it, right? Like, there are tricky things that we can try to do to deal with these sorts of situations. It's the same, I think, in manufacturing. I mean, how many of you have some old Haas mills around that have been around forever, right? They still work wonderfully, but then supporting them can be kind of a problem if they're on the wire. They're not going to update those. So we got to think about some clever ways to do mitigations. So that's dealing with the threat. And it's a combination when you deal with threat of different things. So there's risk acceptance. That's knowing the risk and taking the chance. Hey, maybe it won't blow up, but maybe it will burn in the corner over there, right? Now, this is where I really want to make a point of the fact that when it comes to risk acceptance, this is something that you will probably not be making the call on. This is generally something that's a leadership call. If you're in leadership, you may end up having some of that. But for the most part, if you're not in leadership, we're there to explain the risk, make sure they understand what the true risk is, give them the tools and the information they need to make the call as to whether or not they're going to go, you know what, this probably won't happen, and if it did, it probably wouldn't be a big thing. And compared to making payroll next month, I'm willing to accept this. But what I find is a lot of us, we get hung up on that part where we're like, no, this is super important. We need to fix this. When leadership is like, we're okay with this. We're all right with this piece. We got to understand where our job ends and be able to accept what other people are making the decisions for. If there's one thing that you can take away from this with respect to your roles in the future, that would be one of them. Let the other people do what they're going to do and don't always try to drive everything. So my example here is not uninstalling CrowdStrike Falcon. We're accepting a risk. Who knows what's going to happen? We'll see. Now, risk avoidance is the other one. We just don't do it. So in this context, the military guy's just playing video games. I thought that was kind of clever, right? I got a little carried away with Stable Diffusion when I was making these. It was fun. But we may avoid risky projects as an organization. You look at this and you go, you know what, if we do this, we may put ourselves in legal risk if something goes horribly wrong. We've decided we don't want to do this. So this is another one of those things. We may limit the certain things that we offer. Like, we may not do, an organization may not do physical pen tests because we don't want the legal ramifications of somebody having a problem and getting in trouble or breaking something that's physically expensive or something along those lines. We may decide, hey, we're not going to take that part of the risk. And it's kind of like not installing Falcon at all. But this is actually a very important thing to think about. And then last but not least is risk transfer, which is tossing it over the fence to someone else to deal with. Okay? Insurance is probably the most common type of risk transfer. How many of you have been shopping cyber insurance or something like that? Anyone in that kind of spot, right? Cyber, it's an interesting place to go. It's changing. It's not exactly fun or exciting these days. But that amount of risk that they will take is actually decreasing sometimes, and our risk acceptance part has to increase. Again, a lot of these work together. So you may say, okay, we're going to mitigate risk down to a point that the leadership says, I'm willing to accept the residual risk, or we can transfer a chunk of it over to insurance here, and we're at a point where we're willing to accept that. And I'll give you an example kind of. When we're talking insurance, it's going to be the deductible, okay? I actually did a talk for a big insurance company to a lot of their clients, and we were talking about the way that it's working, where they're having organizations carry a lot more of the deductible or a lot more of the risk on their own. In other words, higher deductibles, because people are a little bit sloppy. They're like, well, we're insured, we'll do some ransomware, no big deal, and that's just crushing insurance companies. So it's a combination of mitigation, maybe even avoidance, transfer, and then accepting what's left over. But again, most of that is not actually on us to make those calls. And I want us to remember that, because I've seen a lot of people get hung up in that. And they've actually gotten very bitter at an organization because they're not listening to them. But don't always think that's our role. So when we handle risk, make sure, like, things when it deals with risk, some of the key things dealing with risk and reducing it, patching processes. Patching is fun. It never breaks anything. It always works well. Come on. Is it that early? We can laugh at that, right? How many of us have rolled out a patch and been like, well, shit, I'm working the weekend. Right? Yeah, it happens. Sorry, kids. Those to you new, don't plan your weekends too much, all right? But we have to have a good process in place for that. And I can tell you, with my military experience and the stuff that we did there, one of the things that started happening to us was, as we expanded and we grew, we actually started stepping on each other's toes when it came to this, as we got more and more devices, right? So here I am, I'm on the AD team, and I'm pushing out some giant-ass GPO, because that's what we did. I'm pushing out a GPO while the network team decides they're going to bounce a box to update something in Cisco. And now something didn't work. And then we got to go fix it. And we found ourselves shooting ourselves in the foot quite a bit on that. And that's actually where we started going down the ITIL road, and we started doing some coordination of change management and things like that. It made our patching lives a whole lot easier, because we could go in a room and we could be like, hold on a second, I'm doing this patch on this time. And they're going, no, wait a minute, I'm doing this on this time. And we would actually coordinate that. Patching is a bigger deal than you might think. It's also incredibly important, because I've seen a lot of junior folks especially really concentrate on things that are internet facing and leave some of the stuff internally because, oh, I don't want to bounce that box. It never comes back up, right? It's always a pain in the butt, right? That's the stuff that when they get in the network, they're going to exploit. They're going to hammer that all day long because it's 5 patches behind and some critical vulnerabilities behind. So that's one that you want to do for handling risk, is make sure you're patching. You want to educate people. Yeah, I do. I work for KnowBe4. I personally believe strongly, I work for KnowBe4 because I believe strongly that we don't educate people enough to help them defend themselves, especially against social engineering and stuff like that, okay? It's happening. It's how they're being targeted. Handle that part. That's a big piece of it. Red team testing or pen testing is absolutely key. I worked at an organization. Oh, it was terrible. I came in, my boss had been there 90 days longer than me. We handled unemployment insurance for several of the states in the US, and we handled the job boards for a bunch of other ones including. So we were actually writing checks out of the coffers of these states, okay? Their security guy, when I came on board and became the security and compliance lead, all he did is he ran a program that ran vulnerability scans on their little internal offline sites. The guy couldn't tell me the difference between a hub and a switch. He had no networking experience. He didn't know what TCP/IP was, and he was the security guy. And we're writing checks out of state coffers, okay? It was a pretty ugly thing. The testing that happened there was simply this one guy going, yeah, I'm running this thing. And that's what they put down as, yeah, we do constant security testing or penetration testing. That's not right, okay? Any of you do like a SOC 2? Anyone go through that process, right? Yeah, we did a SOC 2. I found out their SOC 2 that they had in place, or type 1, the folks that came in and actually did the audit were like, oh, you're missing documents in all these places, so we just wrote some for you and put them in. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not how this is supposed to work, okay? We had a lot of fixing to do. But you want to have that kind of testing done all the time, because I can tell you, once we started actually testing internally, we found out it was a soup sandwich. It was bad. It was really bad. Not unexpected once we started pulling back the layers. The other thing we need to do when it comes to handling risk is we need to give people the tools that they need. Okay, I'm a huge fan of password vaults. That's why it's one of the things that I use up here as as an example. I think credential mismanagement is terrible. We're humans, all right? Imagine you're a user and I come to you and I say, you need to have a secure password, at least 18 characters long, uppercase, lowercase. It's got to have special characters. By the way, never write it down and don't reuse it anywhere. How successful are they going to be with that if we don't give them tools to be able to handle that kind of stuff, right? That's why people reuse passwords across multiple platforms. That's why that kind of stuff happens. So we need to make sure wherever it is that we're giving people tools to do the things that we ask them to do. We need to vet our vendors. CrowdStrike. No. And I want to be sure. I actually think Falcon's a really good tool. I just like to pick on them because that went so horribly wrong. I actually think it's a really good tool. It was just a really bad thing that happened, okay? But there have been some vendors, totally unrelated question. Anyone in here running Fortinet? Yeah. What's that?
Maybe I should pick them.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen Fortinet is kind of like, I'm at the point that I think they should have their own CVE category. All right. Not to beat up on a vendor, but there are certain things that happen a lot like that. So we do want to vet our vendors. And we want to make sure there's SLAs in place that we can live with. Reviewing SLAs is a ton of fun, right? If you have to go through contracts, it's so much fun. It's not, okay? So service level agreements that say we will have this backup online in this much time. If you have, a quick turnaround for recovery in your disaster recovery plan, but your SLAs are like, we'll get to it when we get to it, you're gonna fail. So make sure you're vetting vendors, looking at stuff like that. How many of you security people ever thought you'd be contract readers, or at least having to piece some of that together? It's actually been an important part of my job in a lot of cases. And we want to continuously monitor for threats and know what's on the network. Now, Adam, I know you've done some pen testing. How many times have you found stuff on the network that people are like, how the hell did that TV get there? Or something along those lines, right? Yeah. Half the time we don't know what's actually on our networks. And that can bite us in the butt. I saw an ad. It was a Craigslist ad that somebody had posted up. I think it was on back when it was Twitter. And it was like, we'll pay you $50 a month to plug this into your network. And it was a little Raspberry Pi. And they're like, just take it in, plug it into your network at work. We'll give you $50 a month as long as it's up online. I mean, people are tempted by that. They're like, hey, this is cool. I'll make $50. I hate this company anyways. What the hell, right? So they stuff it under the desk, they plug it in, and now they've got remote access into your thing because of a Craigslist ad. That's real. That's like actually happened. If you're not doing port security or not watching what's actually coming online on your network, man, it gets ugly in a hurry. So those are some of the things I say when we're handling risk. Now, I am going to focus on the human side a little bit here because they have such a target on their back. See, I was so creative. I was so proud using this AI to make this. If you've ever tried to do like any AI generated stuff and actually have it follow a theme and look cohesive, I was super proud that I made it happen, okay? And he's really got a target on his back. It's brilliant. Okay. Sorry, enough of this patting myself on the back. So again, we got the Ishings here. They are a huge risk. AI tools are going to improve the quality of what's coming in, but it's also going to greatly improve the volume of what we're going to be seeing. So I've seen a lot of people get tied up about AI and how, oh my God, it's this new thing. How are we ever going to defend against it? I think there's so much hype around it. It drives me a little bit crazy. AI is good at certain things, but it's not very creative, honestly. It's very good at translations and even localizations. One of the coolest things is I only speak English because I'm American. Most of us do that. If you're a European, you know what I'm saying. But I only speak English. If I want to write a phishing email, for example, I can write this thing up. And I'm not going to be any good phishing people in Brazil or Germany. But if I go and I have translation done through AI and even localized, like I may say, I want to go attack somebody in Germany, or even better, I may say, I want to go attack someone using Bavarian German or Franken or something like that, Brazilian Portuguese. They can get very good translations out of this. And so expanding the scope that they can do and how quickly they can do it and the volume they can do it is going to be pretty critical. The other thing is we keep having breaches, and breaches keep giving out our information. Well, these are great tools for putting together pretexts. In other words, reasons to stories to reach out to you. You know, we saw the Ticketmaster breach. Okay, and we keep seeing these breaches. It's like, oh, they didn't get social security numbers. They didn't get credit cards. Well, credit cards are no big deal. That's a 30-minute deal, usually online, to reset your credit card and get a new one sent. But we're all like so stuck on social security numbers and that kind of stuff. But if I have that list from Ticketmaster and I want to go target some people, I can go, hey, we saw that you bought tickets to the Taylor Swift concert. You were there on this day in this row and seat number. Man, we have a super pop-up Taylor Swift thing coming up here in the near future. Because you were there, here's your free thing. It hasn't been announced yet, but actually, you know, here's tickets for half price or something. You can write scams like that to people by referencing things you know that they did that makes these things very dangerous. Same with medical ones. If you had a medical procedure, I mean, they bill you for all kinds of crazy crap afterwards, right? It's like you get a bill for the person that carried the vial from the phlebotomist to the lab. It's like $42 on someone that's not covered by insurance. Man, if I know you had procedures, I'm firing you off letters saying you owe us $100 for this, you owe us $100 for that, and I'm going to reference the procedure you had and when you had it. So this kind of stuff is actually very dangerous when we're seeing what's going on. Now, again, I talked a little bit about this old equipment. VLAN it. Segment it by IP if you have to. Shut down unneeded services. If you're running a Windows box, by God, half the time Windows is like, let's enable all this stuff. What could go wrong, right? Especially the older versions. You go, oh, no, don't really need that, don't need that, don't need that. So we can shut that off. And if we can, especially if we segment them, monitor the traffic that goes to and from them constantly. If you know you have something that could be very, maliciously used against you, you're going to want to see what's coming and going to it. So watch that kind of stuff and look for those alternate ways to mitigate vulnerabilities. You may be able to shut down old versions of SMB or something like that without applying a patch. That's, I think, a lost art in our world, is mitigating vulnerabilities without having to have it come in a patch format. But you can absolutely do that. All right, so I want to talk about incident response a little bit here. Holy crap, I'm actually talking a lot. Okay, we're going to move a little faster. IR. Any of you guys do IR? Incident response or done incident? It's an interesting world to be in. And these are the tips I'm going to give you about it. When it goes sideways, and it will, make sure you have a well-vetted and tested plan. Because if you just wrote it for the sake of making a check mark for your cyber insurance, it's going to be crap. And that unrolls really fast. Kill some trees. Print it. How many of you have thought about printing your incident response plan? Well, when ransomware hits and you can't get to your incident response plan, it kind of sucks. I've seen that happen so many times to folks that they go, oh my gosh, okay, we don't think about that. Make sure you have a contact list that you can actually reach out to that's printed, that's not digital. and also a timeline for who to contact. And it may vary depending on the incidents. You should have things in there specifically for ransomware. But when do you talk to the board, or when should the board be informed? When should your attorneys come in play? When should insurance be contacted? If you're a publicly traded organization, when do you start doing that kind of reporting? All of that needs to be thought out at the time, because I can tell you from experience, when you're in the middle of it, your brain is sometimes not really working, right? You're just you're so focused on other things. Make sure that you have that stuff in place there. And the roles should be clearly defined. I've been in meetings where they're like, who did this? And everyone looks at each other like, well, I didn't, because I wasn't supposed to. And everyone goes, who the hell was supposed to do this piece? That's not a comfortable thing, okay? Continuing on, when the outhouse is on fire, I like that one, okay? Define the cadence of updates to leadership. How often are you going to update them? When are the expectations? So you don't just necessarily call impromptu meetings on occasion. They may want updates every day, every 2 days, who knows, depending on what's going on. It could be every hour, every half hour. Make no promises and tell no lies. I've seen that go badly too, where you're like, this is what happened in this incident. And then you find out that's not actually what happened, even though it looked like that. And so then all these other people are going, well, you said that's what happened. And I will tell you, they'll never let that go, because they're always in that initial mindset as you go through it. They're like, but you said, oh, well, I changed that later, remember? Don't report assumptions as truth. Always be like, I've had to do this. Right now, it appears that this may have happened, and we're looking into it still. That's important. Take care of your mental health during the crisis. If you need to cry, find a place, go cry. Okay? It can be incredibly stressful in some of these. I mean, I've been up there in front of people. I've got a bunch of general officers, like several stars and SESs and my colonel, and we're talking to these people, and they're demanding answers, and we don't have the answers, and the pressure is just on, and sometimes you're just like, I need to go walk the hallway if I'm going to continue to be effective at what I'm doing here. I need to take a couple minutes for myself, so don't forget that. And sometimes, one of the best things that anyone ever said to me, the best guidance, is stop talking. We were in the middle of an IR thing that happened. I'm explaining my piece, like it was the stereotypical big table in the middle where all the important people sat. Everyone else sits on the ring on the outside. And they had me explain my piece. And they started fighting amongst each other. And I'm trying to go, no, that's not what you're hearing. And my buddy looked over at me and he said, stop talking. Let them fight it out. Let them deal with it. That's not our role. But that was a very important piece that I learned from that, is stop talking, let them make some of the roles, or the calls. Defensive-wise, the only thing I'm really going to say about this, because we've talked a lot about this through this, is your best defense is avoiding the issues up front. It's really easy to get complacent and just kind of chill and be like, yeah, I should probably do this thing, but no, your best choice is to avoid it up front before the apocalypse happens, okay? Use data to find your biggest risks. One of our colleagues, Roger Grimes, wrote a book called Data-Driven Computer Defense, I think it is. And it's great. So you look at things and you go, okay, there's this new big like CVE out or vulnerability that's terrible on all these Linux boxes. We've got 2 Linux boxes, but otherwise we're a Windows shop. Are you going to prioritize your 2 Linux boxes that are not out on the internet or something like that, or not really something that's going to be exposed, over the ones that may do more of your machines? Look at your data. Don't just freak out when somebody names an exploit and throws it around. That happens way too often. Don't just rely on the technical controls. I can't say that enough. And don't be a jerk. We kind of have a reputation as IT and security people of not being the most pleasant people to call. Okay? I always loved the Saturday Night Live skit with the IT guy, right? He comes in, he's like, move! Okay? We have absolutely earned that, folks. All right? We are not people. I was going to wear my people not a fan shirt today, but thought I might want to look a little nicer. We got to stop that. We got to stop being a jerk. Don't judge the individuals when they fail something, if they click on something. We're not there to beat them up, okay? We hire accountants to do accounting, not to be cybersecurity experts. Cut them some slack. but learn from it. And be those people that are not afraid to pick up the phone and go, this may be a waste of time, but that saved my butt a couple of times when they're willing to talk to me about it. So what about this AI thing? It's far less intelligent than many people believe. It really isn't that smart, especially when it comes to being creative, but it's going to be awesome for automation of tasks and stuff. Fantastic for us on the defensive side as well, looking for things that are out of the normal, right? Like doing behavior analysis and then looking for things that are abnormal. It's being used by defenders as well as the attackers. So don't forget that. Don't fixate on all this stuff that AI this, AI that. Oh my God, the attacks are too much to handle. And the biggest advantage is automation and translations in what I'm seeing in here. It's being able to do more with the same resources they used to have. Deepfakes, I love it. James did one yesterday on some deepfakes, showed some really cool stuff in there. We're seeing all the deepfake stuff, audio, video, all that. It's absolutely around. It's going to be able to basically confirm pre-existing biases. If I think the CEO is the one calling me, I'm going to hear the CEO, okay? We got to be careful with that kind of stuff. The translations I already talked about. Be careful what info you upload to AI to summarize, right? Here's my yearly financials for the company, ChatGPT. Tell me what's up. You know, don't go throwing stuff in there or sensitive information like that. Like, hey, sort all of these people's social security numbers through ChatGPT. Let's not do stuff like that. Think about what you're uploading and don't trust those results until you can verify them, because it will lie with confidence. Have you guys had it hallucinate on you in some ways? It is absolutely damn sure what it said is right. And it will continue to back that play when you question it about it too. That happened to that lawyer, right? We heard about the lawyers getting in trouble for that. There was 2 rounds of that. He went to the judge and said, hey, this is some case stuff. And the judge said, I don't think this is something I recognize. Go give me more info. So he went back to ChatGPT and said, expand on that. And it was like, okay, BS, 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 BS. He went back to the judge with it, and that did not go well. I think he ended up getting suspended for a while over that. Went pretty badly. So be careful with it. It lies, and it lies with authority. So having said that, we're about out of time. If you want to connect with me, this is totally not a quishing link. But this is my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. We can chat anytime. I appreciate you guys being here. It's fantastic. This is one of my favorite conferences to come to ever. The staff, please go thank the people in the bright green shirts. Thank them for what they're doing, because they put on a hell of a show here. As much as I speak at different conferences, they do a good job. And Jimmy loves hugs. Do not. It's in my book. I don't love hugs. Anyways, thank you all. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.